My house is presently overrun with children, so I have decided to take over their house. Pretty fancy, huh? Yeah. And unfortunately, their house is probably overrun with spiders. A common reflex that I see in new students who walk into or call into my studio pertains to a narrowing and tensing and downward movement of the tongue root as the voice moves above speech inflection range and into and through the passaggio. Now, this reflex seems to be more prevalent amongst men, and I suspect that it has something to do with the fact that, generally speaking, men are more apt to attempting to muscle their way through the scale. But the fact that I have seen this behavior of the tongue root in singers from various training backgrounds and across all genres and styles, including styles that don't teach or demand a comfortably low and stable larynx, suggests to me that this behavior is indeed instinctive and reflexive. So as the larynx begins to rise, the tongue root instinctively and unconsciously exerts a downward pressure on the hyoid bone in order to stabilize the larynx. Now, if you're not familiar with the anatomy, the tongue is essentially a bundle of muscles that have their attachment into the hyoid bone, which is a little horseshoe-shaped bone at the top and front of the neck. And the larynx, which houses the vocal folds, suspends from that hyoid bone via muscular attachment. So you can see that the tongue and the larynx share some common attachments. So I'm sure you can imagine how the behavior of the one influences the behavior of the other, and vice versa. And so ultimately what we need to do is separate their functions. We need to achieve an independence of function between the tongue and the larynx. Now, I have recorded a few videos on this topic already. I've discussed eliminating tongue tension, taming the tongue. I have 2 videos out on retraining the tongue root, and 1 video on achieving an independence of function between the jaw, the tongue, and the larynx, what I call the troublesome trio, because when one is misbehaving, the others tend to sort of follow suit. But because this issue is so prevalent, I wanted to record yet another video on this topic. So, in order for us to be able to successfully and skillfully navigate our passaggio and achieve a smoothness in our registration, that is the ability to move very fluidly between registers from chest voice to head voice and in the reverse, we need to achieve that independence of function. So the first thing that we need to do to correct this unruly behavior of the tongue root is to develop our functional listening skills. When we're listening functionally, essentially what we're doing is we're learning to listen to how the body is coordinating. And we're listening for the little subtle cues that our body gives us to tell us that the instrument is not functioning optimally. Now, not that we should necessarily be listening aesthetically or subjectively, but one of the first clues that our bodies will give us that our tongue root is misbehaving is in the sound. The sound will be very back, gagged, and sometimes in extreme cases sort of a little bit Kermit the Frog-like. Oh, oh, oh. Now, I am exaggerating it. It's typically a lot more subtle than that, but we need to be able to listen for that. Now, the second clue that we need to be listening for when we're listening functionally is an inability to be able to move fluidly, skillfully between the registers, between chest voice and head voice and the reverse. Oftentimes, singers who have this issue with the tongue root, pressing down, depressing the larynx, they have register breaks or flips into falsetto. And that's because when that tongue root is depressing the larynx becomes inflexible. It's unable to move with any degree of freedom to be able to produce the phonemes, the speech sounds within our song lyrics, as well as the pitches that we're trying to sing. And so the voice sometimes gets stuck between registers. It gets stuck in one register or the other, or there's this really abrupt break or a very clunky switch between registers. And another thing that we need to be listening for is when the vocal folds come apart. We'll hear an airiness, we'll hear a raspiness, or sometimes a little bit of a rattle where it sounds as though the vocal folds are rattling off of each other. And that again is a sign that the tongue root might be depressing the larynx, because when the larynx is inflexible, that makes it difficult for the vocal folds to properly come together, to fully approximate. And when that happens, it can be a very uncomfortable sensation that we experience. Now, the second thing that we need to do to tame this unruly tongue root is to begin to develop a really strong and accurate kinesthesia. That is an awareness of what the various components of the vocal instrument are doing, how they're positioning themselves, how they're moving, the degree of tension that they're using in all of their tasks. Now, most singers who have tongue root tension are not aware of it until their attention is drawn to it. This has certainly been my experience with a lot of the new singers that I work with. But over time, as you start to develop your functional listening skills and become more mindful of your voice use, that kinesthesia will grow, it will develop, it will become stronger and more accurate and more reliable. Now, when I am demonstrating this tongue root tension for my students, when I'm mimicking the sounds that I'm hearing in them, so that they can sort of listen more objectively and hear that because they're having difficulties hearing it in themselves and their own voices, I immediately notice a difference in sensation. I notice how different it feels in the throat. I notice how tense that tongue root feels, how narrow the throat feels, how much more tense the jaw becomes, because again, there's an intermingling of the musculature of the jaw, tongue, and larynx. I immediately notice that. One of the other things that I notice is when I'm demonstrating this, I get that scratchiness, that tickle inside my throat because the vocal folds are not vibrating very efficiently. And so I notice this because I have experienced vocal freedom. I know how to sing with ease and comfort. Now, if you're someone who's never experienced that, if you don't have anything to compare it to, it will be a little bit difficult initially for you to recognize the signs of things not being 100% right within your voice system. And so over time, that skill will definitely develop, and then you'll start to notice here and there a little bit more freedom that you experience, and then you'll start to have something to compare it to, and then you'll start to recognize those clues. You'll start to recognize those signs that you're singing with tongue root tension. All right, so on to the more practical. The first thing that I like to do with students who are experiencing tongue root tension is to have them breathe in and out very deeply. Not a really, really high breath. Get a little bit of a lift here. Allow the soft palate to elevate. Allow the pharyngeal constrictor muscles to release so that the pharyngeal walls dilate. They just open up and relax. And the larynx descends naturally. We don't force it down. We don't assist it in any way. Just that nice rush of air coming in. And if you're somebody who deals with a lot of chronic hyperfunction and a lot of tongue root tension, you may start to notice that the tongue, even during the inhale phase, begins to respond reflexively. It begins to tense and narrow. You may not see it in the front portion of the tongue, but you may start to notice over time as you become more kinesthetically aware that you even have difficulties inhaling and exhaling. So we're going to practice inhaling and exhaling. We're going to allow the jaw just kind of hang, really relaxed. Allow the tongue to just become very passive. It does not need to become engaged whatsoever when we're inhaling and exhaling. We're not articulating any speech sounds. In and out. Feel that passiveness of the tongue. And then what you can do from that point is begin to mouth the words of your vocal phrases, especially those that take you up through that passaggio range into the higher part of your range. And what we want to do here is we want to pay really close attention to how that tongue root is behaving. We have not introduced phonation, so it's not necessarily going to behave exactly as it would when we're actually making sound. But again, if you are somebody who does have this chronic reflex, this reflex of the tongue root to engage and to use excessive or inessential tensions, you will probably notice that this is where it starts. All right, so you're going to inhale and you're going to exhale while mouthing your words. So then what you can do when you begin to feel this complete disengagement of that tongue root reflex is you can begin to whisper those words in the vocal phrase. All right, and again, all we're trying to do here is retrain that tongue root. We're trying to get it to behave a little bit more appropriately. And then when we're able to experience that release, we can start doing other kinds of work as we start to phonate. So one of my other favorite tools that I use for both diagnostic purposes and training purposes is humming. Again, this is one of those situations where you'd be surprised to know how many individuals do not hum correctly. A lot of speakers and singers, when they're attempting to hum, push from the muscles of the throat and they engage that tongue root. So there's that tickle, there's that scratchiness inside the throat, and it always makes me want to cough. That's because I'm intentionally here engaging my tongue root. It doesn't feel good, it doesn't sound good. So ideally when we're humming, what we want to do is to get that tongue root just to relax. In a previous video, I talked about placing the tongue tip between the lips and getting that hum there. And that may help if you're able to get that tongue feeling really, really passive, just kind of lazy, basically. And when you're able to do that, just go into regular humming. And ideally, what you want to feel is this really strong sense of acoustic energy in the front of your face. I would say kind of in the mustache area. You want that really strong buzz, and you want to feel a sense of almost passivity inside the throat region. You don't want to hear that's me pushing in the throat and engaging my tongue root. You don't want to hear that. I had a student last week who described this sensation as like a party in the front of his face. So what you want to get is that party in the front of your face. And when you get that party going on, then you can start using that hum as a pilot into your vowel sounds. You don't want to hear right? That's not correct humming, and that's not going to get you anywhere. Achieve that release in the tongue with the hum first. And when your tongue root and your larynx begin to function independently of each other, that's when you're going to begin to experience vocal freedom. That's when you're going to start eliminating register breaks and those nasty flips into falsetto. That's when you're going to start feeling a lot more ease and comfort as you move through your passaggio and into your upper range. All right, thank you so much for joining me today. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below and I'll respond to them as promptly as I can. And also, please take a moment to like this video and also subscribe to this channel so that you'll receive notifications every time I post new videos. Thanks for watching.